Okay. Well, I say we just jump into it. I know a lot of people are going to be joining, and we're going to ask questions or kind of open up for discussion towards the end. So for everyone who's listening in, my name is Josh Eckel. I'm the one of the members of the board of the Classical Liberal Caucus, and I've got Mr. Jonathan Casey here, who I'll let introduce himself.
Well, I am the chair, for better or worse, of the Classical Liberal Caucus. And yeah, this is the Classical Liberal Project. We've been pretty regular as far as recording. You can find us on YouTube. If you go to lpclc.org/blog, you can find all the links. But yeah, we've kind of skipped. Normally we record on Thursday night, but my travel plans coming back from New York kind of changed that up. So we're recording on a Saturday, and we figured we'd open it up. I know that the people still have questions after a debate like that. So yeah. I'm interested in seeing kind of what everyone's thoughts are and what people want to know. So
I'm sure your wife and kids are glad that you pushed it back, because I know you've been on the road. So glad you made it home safe and no issues.
Well, they went to a friend's birthday party like about 15 minutes ago, so it couldn't have been better timing.
Noted. No screaming in the background today. Okay, got it.
Exactly.
Rock on, man. Well, I'll tell you what I was thinking we could do, and then if you have a different perspective, let me know. But I was gonna after we got through the introductions, give everyone some context of what happened last weekend with the debate. Talk a bit about the actual argument, give some context on the CLC stance with your feedback, Jonathan, and then I was just gonna go through some questions on what the experience was like, what you feel like strong arguments for and against the national divorce topic is, and then, as I said, bring some people at the end to ask some questions if they come up. So if that's good with you, I'll just jump straight into it.
Go for it.
Okay, so for those of you that don't know, the Soho Forum recently hosted Jonathan last weekend, I believe now, to debate Frank Buckley from George Mason on the proposal. The argument was, or at least the statement that Jonathan argued against, was the breakup of the United States into different regions is a workable option likely to bring a marked improvement in human affairs. And one of the things that I've heard, and I don't know about you, but in the last week or so, the conversation, it's really odd to me because the timing couldn't have been more perfect. The day that I think the day before that debate, Marjorie Taylor Greene went on a huge rant and made national news and bringing national divorce back to the forefront. And there, as you guys probably know, we're listening in, if you have any familiarity with the libertarian circles, the concept of national divorce is something that's often argued in libertarian circles. There's a lot of back and forth even within our own party on this, and it's by no means a monolith. But the timing couldn't have been more perfect. I don't know if you planned that, Jonathan.
Well, the fact that Marjorie Taylor Greene the day before the debate tweeted out about national divorce really couldn't have put it more on the forefront of everyone's minds. So yeah, that certainly helped. And then the crowd, it was a pretty packed crowd at the debate. It was Tuesday night. And no, it's pretty packed crowd. And I had a lot of really cool people coming up. It was really cool to have people come up afterwards and talk about exactly that. They wondered if I bribed somebody, but obviously I don't have that much money.
Yeah, right. We're not to that point yet. So I wanted to give context for the listeners that are here right now, and then whoever's listening in on the recording. The CLC, and I don't want to speak for you, Jonathan, but at least I could speak for what from what I've seen from our members, is not against the concept of secession. We're not against the concept of peaceful people seceding, and we think that individuals and states, they should have the right to peacefully secede. So I think it's important that we get that out there first and foremost, because when I've seen all the conversation around this, the first thing that people go out when you say, hey, I think national divorce is a bad idea, is they go, wait, are you against the right of people to secede? And I don't know, not speaking for you, but I think
I completely agree. And I even said this in the debate that I support I recognize the right of individuals to secede. But the way I put it is this: I support your right to Josh. I support your right to go out and do hookers and blow tonight. Now, I'm also going to tell you, your wife's probably not going to be very happy with you, and you're probably going to have some consequences of those actions. But I support your right to those actions. Right. And it's the same with secession. I support the right to secession, but I don't always think that the consequences of that are going to be good for individual liberty. And if anybody's watched the debate, my argument really boils down to secession is not going to change the politicians who are currently in charge. That's not going to change. And so, that's the fundamental problem with secession is that unless you change the politicians, it's just going to be the same old, same old.
Absolutely.
So
yeah, absolutely. And so I thought that was something that before we even get into any of the questions, we should bring that up because it seems like it's been conflated. The argument against national divorce is often conflated with, oh wait, are we against the concept of secession? So that's not the case. I mean, I think if we decide we should do it, we could do it. But yeah, as you said, you said it better than I could. So I wanted to start off, Jonathan, with a little bit of picking your brain on the arguments for and against, and your perspective after kind of going through that experience, what you think the strongest arguments for and against are. And I'm kind of hoping we can steel man the opposition here, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I will. I'll start off by saying, so for those who also, kind of a little bit more background, I was originally slated to debate Ryan McMaken of the Mises Institute, and he had to back out for personal reasons, no fault of his own or the Soho Forum's own, about a week and like 8 days, I think, before the debate. So that's why Frank Buckley stepped in, and I appreciate him stepping in at the last minute to make sure that we actually had a debate going forward. But it also means that some of the arguments that I prepared for of Ryan McMaken's arguments, I didn't really get to express. So I'm disappointed clearly in not being able to express some of those. I'm going to reach out to Ryan McMaken and try to have him on either on a podcast format or even, have a third party host us as a debate style. I'm not a big fan of the debate style. I would much rather have a discussion where we do try, instead of trying to straw man the others, we listen to the other person and then respond directly to what the other person is saying. And I feel like in a debate, it can often be you straw man the opposition and then you tear down that straw man. And so I much prefer a discussion style. But I'm sure we'll if it's not Ryan, we'll get somebody else in here who can better express kind of the libertarian arguments in favor of a national divorce, because I don't think Ryan McMaken Frank Buckley, the professor from Georgetown, I don't think he's a conservative, so I don't think he expressed those arguments very well. So I'm hoping that we will definitely find someone that can express those arguments well. I've got an offer from somebody, a friend of mine, and he was like, "Yeah, I could probably do a lot better." And I was like, "I know you could." So we will definitely find a time and space to do that, because I do want to get into the arguments. I do want to hear the best arguments of the pro national divorce crowd and talk about those. The other thing, so I read, once I learned that Frank Buckley was going to be my new opponent, I read his book, and I was very surprised that he didn't bring up what I thought were going to be his best arguments from his book. He had several studies in his book that shows a correlation between size and freedom of a country. We dug into the numbers, and we didn't think that was the case. I was prepared to go at that, but he didn't really bring that up in the debate. The other thing that I thought he was going to bring up was the kind of the notion of California, for example. He brings up that California pays more to the federal government than it gets back in return, and I thought he was going to bring that up, and I was prepared for it, and then he didn't bring it up. So I was kind of disappointed that I didn't really get to respond to that. So yeah, there was a few things that I kind of wish I had gotten, I wish we'd gotten a little bit more into the philosophical meat of the discussion, as opposed to just whether the practicality of it.
So what do you think?
Yeah.
No, not looking at just Frank's arguments and the things that you actually went back and forth with him on, but you've spent a lot of time in the last 6 months thinking about this issue. What, before we get into the actual, the weaker arguments, what do you think the strongest argument for a national divorce is? Like, if you had to steel man the opposition here, what do you, does anything really stick out to you from your research?
Yeah, I mean, there's always going to be the argument that New Hampshire's the favorite argument, right? So you have this tiny state that can secede, and I'm sure they could probably get away with it fairly easily. There's downsides to it, because you'd be leaving the free market environment of the 50 states. A lot of people, one of my problems with the national divorce crowd is they always make assumptions. They always make the assumption that, we would just be able to negotiate free trade again. Well, hang on. we don't have free, that perfect free trade within the 50 states where there's really no barriers between the 50 states and trading with each other. That's not something that we just grant to anybody. So I don't know if there was a state that left the union, I don't think it would just automatically be granted to them. Oh yeah, welcome back to the free trade,
Right.
free trades, area that we have here. So I wish that they would realize that when the political the political dynamics change, it also means that there's going to be policy dynamic changes.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of that conversation actually reminds me of the stuff that was going on with Brexit before and after the
Right.
event. There were a lot of assumptions
Yeah,
made
and I'm
before the
also
vote.
surprised. Yeah, I'm surprised that nobody answered or nobody asked any questions about Brexit in the question time.
Right.
But my answer there really is one. uh, the reason why they're able to do it is because there's a cultural split, right? There's the culture of Great Britain is very different from the culture of mainland Europe. And really whether or not the success, and we won't know about the success, whether Brexit was successful or not, until we see what policies they implement. If England comes out and says, all right, we're going to open up free trade, we're going to have we're going to implement free trade, free markets, and free migration, and we're just going to go with that, then yes, I would say yes, it would absolutely be a good thing. I think that the wealth of their nation would increase over time, and they would be better off without the European Union. But I just don't see that. I don't see
Well,
that happening.
and the problem, and this goes back to kind of what you were touching on earlier, is that you have to make a series of assumptions before the act of secession
Right,
happen. And so, like, I mean, free trade requires two parties to agree, right? It's not
right.
just one party. It requires both parties to remove barriers, and so you can't
Yes.
predict those kind of things. So the New Hampshire example, I think, is a great one.
And to
Sure,
be
New Hampshire.
clear, and to be clear, even if the other side isn't willing to do free trade with you, you're still benefited by even if the other person has tariffs on your goods, you should still waive all tariffs on any or reduce tariffs to the very minimum. There's some understandable costs of customs and things like that that might need to be covered by a tariff, but the tariff should be as low as possible for
Sure. Well,
sure, regardless of
so
what the other country does.
yeah, so okay, so without getting too much into the nuance on that, so we steelman that looking at the strongest argument on the opposition side. So what do you think your strongest argument was, or your strongest argument against national divorce is? After you
Well,
spent all that time.
I'm not sure what I would say would be the strongest argument is, because you're always the audience is always what determines what's your strongest argument. Whatever resonates with who you're talking to is going to be the strongest argument. And last night, by far, it was my argument that it was not regionally workable. When I talked to people afterwards, they would come up to me and say, "Listen, you changed," which, by the way, was one of the most incredible experiences of my life. When people come up to you and say, "You changed my mind on this issue," that's really cool. That's really powerful. That's not an experience that I'd really, um, done in person before. I've had plenty of people message me, plenty of people DM me, all this type of things about some of my messaging around the libertarian movement, Liberty Party, that have said, "Hey, I really like how you talk about liberty issues," but to have people come up to you in person and say, "You changed my mind," was really special. Um, but no, so my argument that really kind of won me the debate, as far as I could tell, was the regional workability, right? Because if you separate the countries between red and blue states, you'll always have you'll have a ton of people in rural areas of blue states that are going to be left behind by Republicans in the red states, and then if you have the urban areas in the red states, you're going to be left behind by the Democrats in the other states. And I think I'm convincingly made the case that that's not a situation that a lot of people are going to want. That's not really workable. That's you're going to have to you're going to have to you're going to have to think about that long and hard, because you're going to essentially you're going to end up having to divide the country. If you divide the country along the 2020 election lines, you're going to end up with 42% of Americans on the wrong side of that border.
Yeah, and
That's a big that's
how
a
many
big number.
you sort of cited a number. It was like an X amount of miles of new border that was created with that breakdown. Do you remember
I
what that
didn't.
number was?
I did. We didn't calculate the mileage. We didn't calculate the mileage, but I said thousands of new miles of new
Yeah,
border.
yeah, got it. Yeah.
So it would be quite yeah, quite harmful to move free movement across the United States. The one thing that I wish I had been debating a libertarian, because I think they could have brought up the argument, well, we should divide down further than the states. But my counter to that really is, where's the motivation to do so? I don't really see any real world motivation to divide down further than the states. Two, Republican states are not going to give up their economic powerhouses that are the urban areas. Urban areas are responsible for the vast majority of the GDP production in this country. Like that is a huge amount of money. Like, for example, blue counties are responsible for 71% of the GDP of the nation. So I just don't see a scenario where, if you're trying to start a new country, you're going to give up your economic powerhouse. And same with the blue states. I don't think they're going to give up their food security in giving up the rural areas of their states. These are things that happen. These are things that are considerations when you're starting a new nation, that I think are often ignored by proponents of national divorce, who think we can divide further to a more local level than the states. And if there was a practical plan to do that, if we could federalize down, divide up the states even more. Like, for example, I would be fully in excuse me. I'm fully in support of movements of making two states out of Illinois, where Chicago's its own state and Illinois is its own state, or dividing up California, making it two states, where you have, I'm absolutely all for those things. Or, for example, Western Oregon, where you have some counties voting to leave and go to Idaho. I'm fully in support of all of those things, because they avoid the biggest issues that I have with national divorce. So that's one of those things that I really wish I could have discussed further with, if I had a libertarian opponent, that we could have gotten more into the weeds on that proposal.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point, and I actually have some questions I'm going to try to ask that, trying to bring us back to the libertarian argument. Josh Marcinek does have his hand raised. You want to bring him on?
Yeah, Josh was my for the record, Josh was my geography guy. Are you able to bring him up, or do I need to bring him up?
Yeah, I can. I think so.
Okay.
Yeah, I just hit approve. I'm not sure.
I think it worked. You guys can let me.
Hey, there we go.
I wanted to hop in here and talk about the borders. So I actually did calculate the.
That's right. I was going to ask you if you did.
And so I just have the numbers here. I figured I'd rattle them off. So the current border perimeter of the United States is 114,259 miles, I think, is the calculation. So according to what I have written down here, if the United States was split into two nations based on the vote totals of the 2020 election, the Democratic nation would have about 54,000 miles of borders, and the Republican nation would have about 76,000 miles, and it would result in an increase of 15,641 miles of border in total.
Very
That's a big number. Those are some big numbers.
Already imagine the border checkpoints. Very, very good context, Josh. Thanks for bringing that up. Since you're here too, and you helped a lot with the prep. That was another question I was going to ask, Jonathan, about what your preparation process was like. How did you go about building the case? How did you go about exploring these ideas and making sure that you were as succinct as possible?
Yeah, being succinct certainly turned into a problem at the end, because I have about 20 pages of notes on this thing. But yeah, no, we built a team. Josh was on the team. Josh was actually there Tuesday night. Came in from Philadelphia, so I very much appreciate him making the drive. But yeah, so we started once I knew once I was invited by Gene Epstein. I knew the resolution, and so we broke the resolution down into, what does the resolution require the affirmative to prove, right? And it's, one, geographically workable or regionally workable, that it's politically workable, and that it would lead to an improvement in human affairs. So we had our three main points that we needed to show that the affirmative needed to prove. The affirmative needed to prove these three things, and I needed to show how these three things were very unlikely. And so that's really where we started, and we just built it. We built it out from there. We spent a lot of time on opposition research. We researched Ryan McMakin at the beginning, and then obviously the past week we poured into Frank Buckley. I had some extra volunteers jump on to help me watch videos and pull clips for me. Say, hey, you need to watch this about what he said, because he wrote a book about I think called The American Secession, I think is what it's called. So we dove into that. We dove into some of his media interviews to just kind of anticipate what type of points he would bring up. And my team did an incredible job. I feel like I was very over prepared for what we ended up running into. So I was very, very pleased with how we ended up there. None of the points that were brought up were any surprises to us. So I was that alone says that I was prepared well by my team. So that made a huge difference, because I think that also came off well because my opponent did not necessarily answer all of the questions, whereas I felt like I really stuck to the questions and answered the questions from the audience. And really kind of wanted to focus on actually answering the question and not just throwing jabs. So at least that's what I was trying to do.
Yeah, no, that's beautiful. So that's great. I have a lot of other questions just around the arguments dynamics, like just different nuances that I think you dug into that I think our audience might be interested in. But I wanted to let everyone know, if you have a question and you want to jump in and chat, you're welcome to just raise your hand and request like Josh did. We're happy to bring you in. I think we're trying to keep this under 45 minutes. So anytime in the next 10, 15 minutes would be great. So, Jonathan, one of the questions I have, you spend a lot of time talking to libertarians, no surprise. And with the fact that this is a divisive issue inside the liberty movement, how do you feel like, and this is a very broad question, but your gut reaction is fine. How do you feel like libertarians should address and approach this topic, not only internally in the movement, but when talking to people externally? Do you have any commentary or thoughts on that?
Yeah, don't talk about state rights. Talk about individual rights. I think we have to be very clear that our support for the quote unquote state rights is because we believe in individual rights. So we do in fact believe that there is a right for people to secede and to pull themselves out of a political union. I think every libertarian would agree with that. But I think we have to be very careful about talking about states' rights, because I think it can devalue our stance on individual rights. And like I say in the debate, every individual has the right to secede, but they also have the right to not secede. And so we have these competing rights. And we have, people who want to secede. Does that mean that they have the right to pull everyone in their area out with them who don't want to secede? So the way I've put it in the debate really is, in my opinion, to secede, you have to be able to demonstrate that everyone in your region will gain more individual liberty. They will have more respect for their rights. In my book, I'd love to see if somebody else has a different theory on this, but in my book, the only justification to seceding, even when some of your neighbors don't want to secede, is that at the end of the day, you will be providing them with more individual liberty. I'd be curious if anybody has objection to that, but I haven't really seen any. But that is kind of my gut instinct on that reaction is that position.
Yeah, so I'd like to dig into that a little bit more. One of the things that you said in the debate, which I thought was very interesting, is if you divide red and blue, then you end up with 66 million individuals caught on the wrong side of the border. And
so that's just voters, by the way. That is only the voting count. If you extrapolate that out, so if you take that's 22 election results, that's 66 million voters that would be on the wrong side of a border. If you extrapolate that percentage out to the rest of the population, there would be 138 million people caught on the wrong side of the border, and that doesn't include independents.
Yeah. So the idea that, one of the things that I think is if you're going to argue about national divorce, it's a lot easier to have that conversation when you step outside of the partisan lens. So Marjorie Taylor Greene saying, let's have red states and blue states split up, that's a nonsense argument. Like, that really is. They're talking hundreds of millions of people on the wrong side. You're talking about, making the urban-rural divide worse. Many of these red states, quote unquote red states, are not, if you look at the actual makeup of the population, they are not vast majority red by any means. It's a lot closer than it sounds. So the argument, to steelman the other side of, hey, let's get it down to localities, is a lot stronger to me
Right,
you
but
know,
then what do you do with suburbs who are split right down the middle?
yeah, sure, absolutely.
So
Right.
it's again, like I listen, I appreciate the argument of getting it down to localities, and in fact, in many ways, I kind of agree with it. I would love to see a world where that's possible. I just don't see it's possible right now, and I don't really see. I don't think that dividing the country along the red or blue lines is really a good way forward in any scenario, local or non. Because again, like I said in the debate, this isn't a authoritarian versus libertarian debate. It's authoritarian versus authoritarian.
Bingo. So one of the things that did come up too, and I don't feel like you guys were able to really dig into it, is a conversation around energy, water rights, how those things are broken up. Because I think another big element of the conversation is I think I saw Craig Bowden tweet about this, is who gets the nukes, right? Who gets the water sources? How do you deal
Yeah,
with the energy? So did you have any commentary on that maybe you weren't able to get into depth with?
yeah. So I didn't. In my opinion, these are solvable issues, along with like welfare and social security. All of these big issues that are really that would make a national divorce very difficult, but I don't think they make a national divorce impossible. So I focused during the debate. I wanted to focus on what I thought that what makes national divorce impossible, right? The political and regional workabilities, and that it would not lead to an improvement in human affairs. So I focused on the things that I thought it was impossible, the mountains that it couldn't overcome. But these are issues that are very difficult to overcome. I think they are. I think we are able to overcome them, but I think they're very difficult. Yeah, for example, water rights is a big issue. I mean, almost every year there is a case in the Supreme Court between states about water, and there's one in the Supreme Court right now. So yes, instead of them being two different, instead of them being two different states, if they were two different countries, that becomes a whole different dynamic and issue. And again, it goes back to dividing up the country regionally. Are you, as a nation, if California is so dependent on water from some of these other states, is it really going to allow them to be independent? So yeah, there's a lot of issues as far as who gets the nukes. I actually think Ryan McMakin, my original debate opponent, he has a whole chapter on his book dedicated to this, and he answers it fairly well. Though I don't think it's as easy a question as he suggests, especially if we talk about the idea of national divorce down to localities. Then what do you do with the nukes? If we divide into two countries, okay, I can see these two sides coming together. Assuming peaceful. I'm assuming peaceful.
Right.
I do not like I do think that there's a high chance of national divorce leading to violence. But I understand that most people who talk about national divorce would say violence is not the right way. If it goes towards violence, nope, we're not for it. So I try to avoid saying, that it will lead to violence. But if it doesn't lead to violence, I do think two sides could probably come together and decide who gets some of the nukes, right? Fine. If you could divide down to 50 states or 50 different countries, okay, that becomes a much bigger issue. And that's a really difficult issue to solve, because what states do get nukes and what states don't get nukes, and I don't know the answer to that. I mean, it's one of those. And as far as energy goes, like Texas is basically on its own power grid, so there wouldn't be too big of an
Yeah.
issue. But
Texas would
I know
probably
that
make out
Europe.
the best.
I'm not too sure. I know Europe is on separate grids for the most part. I'm not 100% sure about that. So it would lead to complications for sure, as far as dividing up the United States into new countries. If you went more than one or two countries down, it would create complications. But I don't know that it would be impossible to solve. But it would be difficult. It wouldn't be easy.
So another one of the things I wanted to talk about as well was a little bit about foreign policy and whatnot. But again, one more reminder, since we've got about 5 or 10 minutes left in the conversation, if you have a question, feel free to just raise your hand or jump in. I think one of the last questions I had for you, Jonathan, was the nuances around foreign policy, diplomatic relations with other countries. I know you thought about that too as part of your prep. What do you envision a post-national divorce world being? I mean, there's a million different scenarios, but how do you feel like that would affect foreign relations?
That's a good one. People say, well, if the U.S. dissolved it in NATO, I think that's absolutely wrong. I think you just end up with more members of NATO. I think that there's no political motivation to leave NATO among our current political leaders. So I don't think that again, you're going to have the same political leaders after national divorce that you did before. So you've got, you're going to have the same neocons in office who are going to want to join NATO. So I don't really see much changing there. I would like, I would, a lot of people say, well, it would end the military-industrial complex, but that really it's only the case if it is a peaceful, if it's a peaceful divorce. Because if it's not a peaceful divorce, well, everyone's up in arms, and you've just fed the Leviathan. Also, there's one thing that I didn't really get to is when you look at especially the political landscape of red states, a lot of them are they're really pushing the hard border security point. And so what you would see is you might see less military spending and more defense, defend the border spending, right? I think that the border control crowd would go crazy in the red states. I think that would be a massive boost to spending in that area. And I think that so I don't necessarily think that ending the military-industrial complex would necessarily be the end result of a national divorce. I think it would change it to some degree.
Yeah, and despite the fact that I don't think any one of us would, I don't think saying, oh, the federal government is going to invade you is an argument against national. I don't think it's a strong argument against national divorce, right?
Yeah, because we have the same, like, here's the thing, NATO invades people and it's a conglomerate, right? And so I don't necessarily I don't necessarily think that would really change the dynamic, because again, you have the same politicians who think the same way, who have the same foreign policy mindset of interventionism. That's what needs to be changed more than the geographic makeup of the United States. And our politicians are what needs to be changed.
Absolutely. And the idea that somehow if you create thousands of 15,000, I think is what Josh said, new miles of border, you're going to somehow reduce the investment in the military industrial complex and the military infrastructure that you need to support that border. If you really want to enforce it, again, it's a little bit naive, that's for sure. I think, and that's assuming there's no conflict between states, which I think is also extremely unlikely. So,
right.
Does anyone have any other questions? I think we're about at time. I saw a hand go up, but then I think it went back down. So I'm not sure if that was an accident. Anyone have any questions? Josh, I don't know if you have any context on the prep that you might want to chime in on, or Jonathan, whether you have anything on your mind while we wait.
No, it was a great experience. I will say that as far as the first public speaking appearance, it's a tough one to go into for a debate. I kind of, that's a tough one, because I was trying to be very careful about what I was saying. And I don't know. It's one of those things I was like, maybe that shouldn't have been my first public speaking experience, but hey, we pulled it off, right?
You did a great job. And Ghost Fox, actually, who is listening in, he's not able to speak because he's on PC. But he said, "I feel like there isn't really a good argument for a divorce. Our military is weakened by being split, and we leave ourselves open to more foreign influence in our elections.
Yeah,
we might end up getting bullied around like Europe."
Right. Yeah, that's a great point, and that's one that I have a whole paragraph on in my notes that I didn't really get into. But you're right. Europe has been bullied by Russia because it's so energy dependent on Russia. So you would have a very similar circumstance in the United States. The other thing is, in the United States right now, it's a giant Switzerland. We've got two massive oceans on each side of us. We've got a friendly country to the north, friendly country to the south. We are in a geopolitically very secure position. And clearly we shouldn't be spending as much on our military, because we really don't need it as much, because we are so geographically defended by just our position. But you're right, if it would open us to foreign interference, foreign control. And that's another thing that I don't think really gets talked about enough, is that if national divorce actually became more politically possible, or if it became more realistic, you would have so many accusations of foreign interference. Oh, Russia's trying to get New Hampshire to secede. Russia's behind it. And I think that would be when we say, oh, it would just be peaceful, I think a lot of people would buy into that and be willing to use violence to prevent a country they thought was being influenced by a foreign country from leaving.
Yeah,
that's what scares me. And I like I've said in the debate, I absolutely am against any violence on any state that wants to secede. But I do see a scenario in which that violence could be riled up against somebody, a state trying to secede.
Got it. Yeah, no, well said. We have a hand up, and I think we're almost at time. So Oliver, I'll let you jump in here and maybe provide your comment. Let me see if I can bring you in. Let's see. Should have accepted. You have to check my work there, Jonathan.
Yeah, I think so.
Oh, there we go. Hey, Oliver.
Go for it,
what's
Oliver.
going on, brother?
You're muted, by the way. Oh, I think you muted, Oliver. Oh, maybe it was a misclick.
Hey guys, how you doing?
Oh, there we go.
And
Hey, Oliver.
by now it's impossible to the separate the states around the United States. The miss the because Texas was a independent state for a long time, but is is very hard situation there. That is all.
Did you say Texas, Oliver? I didn't catch that.
That is all I can explain. Texas was a independent state.
Yeah, I actually, interestingly enough, and I think I caught a portion of that. I think out of all the states in the union, the one that could get away with a national divorce easiest would be Texas. Um, just, I think we touched on that a little earlier in the conversation.
Well, I think that we kind of go back to the cultural divisions. Really, that's what drives national divorces. And I think that Texas has somewhat of a different culture. But here's the thing: 42% of Texans are not born in Texans. So the people are residents of Texas. So there's just not a cultural divide that really would create the impetus for something along those lines. But listen, it could change in 50 years. I don't know. But as far as right now goes, I just don't see any true cultural divisions that would actually separate, the country apart, at least in a way that actually kind of makes sense geographically. So,
agreed. I don't know, Oliver, if you have any more, if you have any questions or commentary before we close. We're at time now. But Jonathan, I'll hand it off to you.
Yeah, no, thanks for everybody for jumping in. I appreciate coming and talking. Feel free to, I'll be interested in seeing if anybody comes up with some real counter arguments to what I put forward at the debate. I like the idea of putting arguments, putting things out there that people can respond to. So if anybody sees anything, please forward them to me. Let me know so I can actually look at them and see. Because I feel like we put some really good arguments against national divorce out there from a principled libertarian perspective. So I'll be interested in seeing what responses we get back. And yeah, we'll definitely have more discussions about this going forward, because I think it's an important topic about what we focus. The liberty movement focuses its energy on, because that's one of my oppositions to it, is that I want to focus on things that I think really will improve individual liberty in this country, and I just don't see national divorce being that path. That's why we have a whole section on our website. If you go to wiki.lpclc.org, you can check out all of our policy guides, and we've got a bunch of different policy ideas, mostly for local level governments, where things along zoning laws, licensing laws, things like some places you aren't even allowed to have a garden. So there's just little things like that localities can really impose on your liberty that really aren't that hard to fix. You just need to go talk to your city councilman. You need to get out there, get active in your communities, and push for more individual liberty. So that's kind of what we're going to try to focus on for sure. So
make sure I don't forget to mention this. If you are interested in continuing the conversation in a lot more of a interpersonal fashion rather than this kind of stage and audience thing, we're going to have a members meeting in Discord here in 20 minutes.
Yeah, and if you go to lpclc.org, our Discord link is on there for Classical Liberal Caucus members. We kind of every Saturday at 2:00 we kind of hang out and just talk about whatever anybody wants to talk about. Sometimes it's sports, sometimes it's politics. Who knows? But feel free to jump in there as we close. I appreciate everyone coming in and talking and the questions. And I'll see. Oh, next week we'll have on the podcast we're gonna have Dylan Burns. He's a Twitch streamer, but he's also I'd really call him an independent reporter as much as anything. He's done some really good work. So we'll have him on to talk about Ukraine and kind of everything going on there. So make sure you tune in next week, and we'll go from there. Thanks for everyone for jumping in.
Thanks, guys. Have a good weekend.